Thanks so much, Caroline. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Get Executives to Your Business Reviews and Keep Them Coming Back. My name is Marissa Mueller. I'm the Digital Marketing Manager here at Corporate Visions. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Before we get started, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items so that we can make today's event as interactive as possible. As I'm sure you've discovered, you have joined today's presentation muted, and you will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. However, you'll have the opportunity to use both your chat box like you've been doing and your Q&A box throughout the presentation. So to use either or of them, you can simply hover over them at the bottom of your screen, and you'll see both your Q&A and your chat options. Submit any of the questions you have for us using the Q&A box, and then use the chat box to answer any questions that Doug may ask you. Be sure to select in your chat box the blue bar that says all panelists and attendees so that others can see what you have to say and they can join in on the conversation. Feel free to send in your questions at any time during today's event. Doug will be answering them throughout the event. And just as a reminder, following the event, we will be sending all attendees a recording of today's webinar along with the slide deck within the next 24 hours. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. It's my pleasure to introduce Doug Hutton, SVP of Products here at Corporate Visions. Take it away, Doug.
Thanks so much, Marissa, and thank you, Caroline, as well, for getting us off to a great start. So excellent to see so many folks from around the globe on today's webinar. And I'd ask you to keep that chat box open because we're actually going to dive right into that chat box right at the beginning as you dive into how to get executives to your business reviews and keep them coming back. And that latter part may actually be more important. So I'd like to actually start in that chat box with 3 simple questions. The first question, type your answer into the chat box to this question. What percentage of your deals require a senior client executive to sign off on it? And by senior client exec, VP or above. Let's see what answers we got. We got 100, 80, 80, 95, 90, 75. Lots of 75s, couple zeros in there, By and large, though, I'm seeing 80 to 100%. 80 to 100% with a few smatterings below. So if I'm summarizing all the chat answers so far, simply a lot. You need that executive to get that deal. Let's jump forward to question number 2, though. Okay, so we now everybody in today's webinar knows that a lot of your deals, almost 100%, need a senior client executive. How's that translating to your business reviews? And so in the chat box, just type in the number of client business reviews you've had this year. It can be a guess, can be relatively accurate, but the number of client business reviews that you've had this year. Again, seeing a variety of responses here, anywhere from, oh, not enough, James, I like that reply, sneaking in amidst the numbers. But anywhere from 8 to 10, the highest I've seen so far, 100. 100, I like that number. That's a lot of business reviews right there. Working on it, Leslie. I love that as well, and I think that's why many of you are on today's call. So, in short, so far, deals need executives. Everybody on today's call, for the most part, is doing a lot of business reviews. This last question may require a bit of honesty from the group, because the last question is this that I'd like you to put into the chat. What percentage of those client business reviews was that senior client executive actually there? What percent of your client business reviews was that senior client executive actually there? And here's where you're seeing in the chat box, if you've got it open, a wide variety of responses. The lowest number I've seen so far pop up is 10, all the way up to 100, which is fantastic for those of you who have. It came and went so fast in the chat, but one was important that I want to pick up on. Came and left. I wonder how often that is true for you as well. So even just with those 3 questions, you've established the baseline for today's webinar. That 1, you need senior executive sponsorship, support, and ultimately sign off for your deals. And you're doing a lot of business reviews that historically have been the thing that have kept execs engaged. But yet they're failing you. And in fact, if I were to do a quick average of all those numbers, they're failing to keep that senior executive engaged half the time or more. And I'd argue that that is likely, among other things, for this primary reason. And it's something that sellers struggle with across the board. And it's this distinction between the conversations executives want to have and the conversations that sellers are good at. And it's this distinction between product knowledge and business expertise. Because if you ask executives in serious decisions, actually asked executives this, would you rather have conversations with sellers about their product knowledge, about their products and services, or would you rather have business conversations about your business, insight, etc.? And executives responded to that survey from Serious Decisions saying that they want to have these business expertise, these business discussions 4 times more than they want to have discussions about product knowledge and your services. Serious Decisions then also asked those same executives, though, where do sellers that you meet with, where do they actually specialize? And how proficient are they at product conversations or business conversations? And in fact, what Serious Decision found when they asked that question was the precise opposite. In fact, those executives replied that sellers were 88% proficient at talking about their own stuff, products, services, etc., but only 24% proficient at talking about the senior executive's business. And so what does this mean? It means there is an enormous gap between what your executive buyers want to talk about and what sellers are actually good at. And at Corporate Visions, we call this the business value gap. And it is one of the major reasons why your executives that are so important to you winning these deals often don't show up for your business reviews. And like that one participant said in the chat, even when they do, they come and they leave because they are not finding the conversation worthy of the business expertise that they need. And so across the course of today's webinar, you're going to see key concepts and practical tools to get those senior client executives to your business reviews, and more importantly, to keep them coming back. And it comes down to 3 pillars as to how you're going to do that. The first, you're going to make the case. And this may not mean exactly what you think. This is not making the case to come to the business review. This is backing up that executive relationship even before you sign the initial deal. It means planning out the partnership. How do you establish from the get-go that your client and executive relationships are going to be measured by the right things and the things that your executives care about? Last but not least, on an ongoing basis to keep them coming back, how are you going to document results on the key measures that that executive cares about so that they know that when they show up to each and every business review, that they are going to get value? So make the case, plan the partnership, document results. And let's dive into the first, making the case. 2 things here. Why should your executive buy now, and how can you use quantified ROI? Before I flip the slide, if you would just grab a quick piece of paper, grab a piece of paper and a pen if you have it handy. My children have been doing virtual school now for about 8-9 months. My latest notebook is actually my son's from his Greek class at their Greek school that they went to last year. So no judgment at all if your paper that you picked up happens to be child's notebook. But on that paper, you're going to actually see across the course of this webinar a single picture, build and build as we go. And so as this picture first comes to life, draw along as you see it come to life on the screen. And you'll have a bit of a memento, if you will, from the time here today. And this make the case, starting with this image that you're going to take with you across the webinar today, just starts with a simple black line across the page with a dot at the beginning that says engage. Think of this as the first time that you engaged a prospect account, an account that you did not do business with to date. And let's say you executed a fantastic sales conversation and you got them to buy from you for the first time. So put a second dot on your page and write first buy right underneath it. Here at Corporate Visions, we call that conversation a why change conversation. Why should one of your prospects change how they are doing business and buy from you instead of what they're doing today? But it's not that simple, of course, especially as it relates to the executive, because where does the executive fit in this image? Well, typically that executive comes into play towards the end of that sales process. And you need, as you all just showed in the chat a few moments ago, you need that executive sign off to win that deal 80 to 100% of the time. We at Corporate Visions call that why now. And so you may be thinking to yourself at this moment, hey, I came to this webinar today wondering how I'm going to get executives to my business reviews, and yet we're talking about the time that I make the business case to my executive before they've even bought, before I've had a business review. How is this relevant? Because the research that Corporate Visions has done has said that one of the critical aspects of a why now conversation with an executive actually has in it what we call quantified ROI. And jot down that term on your page as well, quantified ROI. And so in fact, if you want executives to come to your business reviews down the road, they need to start seeing the value and the potential return before they even sign off on the deal. And so when we say quantified ROI, ROI can be a very big, a very broad concept. But when we say quantified ROI, we actually think of it here at Corporate Visions as three distinct types of returns. And the first type of return is what we call hard returns. These are the returns in ROI that almost everybody on this call, I'm sure, is familiar with. Your return on equity, your, let's call it return on, I was gonna say return on research, one of our concepts from our executive selling course. But these are your financial returns. These are the ones that are typically used to measure ROI for an executive. But we are finding more and more that executives in the buying process are not just looking at hard returns. At the top of the triangle, they're also looking at things like strategic returns. Strategic returns. Think here of things like risk. Think here of things like perhaps environmental. Think here, recently I'd even put diversity and inclusion up in strategic big bets that executives could win or lose on, both personally and for their company. And the third type of return down here in the lower right side of the triangle is what we call soft returns. Things that don't necessarily translate directly into hard returns, but that are incredibly important to how an executive measures ROI of a given investment. And so getting an executive to come to a business review actually starts here. It starts in quantifying the strategic returns. It starts in quantifying soft returns and actually getting to a point at the end of the sale when you have that executive ready to sign your deal, a compelling, quantified ROI case that gets them to buy now and to sign off on that first deal. Now, here's the challenge. We may have on today's call some customer success professionals. We may have on this call some sellers who don't own this initial deal. In fact, they only come into play after that initial purchase. And here's where we see executive engagement drop off almost immediately. Because this ROI case, folks, this ROI case needs to travel. It needs to travel from the pre-sale process to the post-sale process. And it needs to do that by something we call partnership planning. Because it's not enough just to make the case. You need to then take that making the case into planning the actual partnership, into translating that quantifiable but potential ROI into hard metrics that you will actually use to get that executive to keep coming back to your business reviews. Before I dive into that, let me just take a couple of the questions that pop up into chat because they're good ones. Examples of soft returns. Think here of employee engagement, perhaps customer satisfaction, a general metric that in and of itself doesn't have a hard dollar return, but could very easily be linked to a hard dollar. Take employee engagement, for example, a soft measure. Well, you could link employee engagement to turnover, which then leads to recruiting and hiring costs. And so you have to play that out in that regard. Employee engagement is important. If you're selling, let's say, HR software, how can you take that soft return and make it a hard return, very specifically the cost that they could incur by employees turning over and coming out to hiring? Capability building, Julie, I'd agree with that as well. Again, anything that's not immediately measurable with a hard metric, dollar value, but one that could turn into that. So you've got your ROI case. You've got the executive's attention. In fact, you all just said at the outset of today's webinar that that executive is signing off on your deal 80 to 100% of the time. And yet, for those of you who said 50% or less of your business reviews, that executive showing up, from our experience at Corporate Visions, that's likely because your partnership was not planned well. And it was likely because you lost that executive immediately after the initial sale closed. And so if you've got your piece of paper, let's add to this diagram. So far you've got engage, you've got the first purchase, you've got that make the case and the executive sign off. And you'll notice the title of this slide, Keeping Executive Altitude. This is about keeping your executive engaged after they've just put some money down on your products and services. Because there's this weird time after you purchase, or excuse me, after your executive purchases. Draw that dotted line down your page, and right underneath it, as you see on the screen, the status quo equals you. Because there's this weird time between when an executive signs a contract until you actually start your implementation, until your products and services becomes the ones they are using every day, and before you start proving your potential value. And in fact, it's a weird time because you could argue that perhaps your competitor, they aren't really the status quo because you just defeated them in the sales process. But you aren't really the status quo either. And so there's kind of a big question mark here in this area between the time the purchase takes place and when you actually solidify yourself as the status quo. And there's an opportunity there, and we see it far too often, where you lose your executive sponsor's attention. And so during that time period, you need to execute a business review, but it's a very specific type of business review. And we call it partnership planning. Think of this as the first post-sale business review that you have with the client executive. What this is not project implementation. This is not project planning. This is an executive level business review designed to kick off the partnership and to do one thing very specifically. Validate, agree to, and assign accountability for the metrics that you will jointly use to define the success of the partnership. Let me say that again, because if there's one thing that you leave today's webinar from, it's the importance of partnership planning. In this partnership plan, think of this as your first business review post-sale, your first business review post-sale, where you need to validate, agree to, and assign accountability for the metrics you will jointly use to define the success of the partnership. You do this right, you get your executives to the next business review. You do this poorly, you may lose the executive for the entirety of the contract. And so what is partnership planning? Beyond just this sort of rather theoretical definition that you see on your page. Well, if you need to validate and agree to the right metrics, you need a tool to find what those metrics are. And that tool is called the triple metric. It's another simple diagram. Take out a second sheet of notebook paper if you've got a second one. Separate diagram, simple to draw. Simple to draw because it looks like a I guess this was, I saw something, no, a right triangle, 90-degree angle here. Right triangle divided out with three levels like so. And at the bottom of the triple metric, write the project level, the project level. And here is what we find in this first business review that we call partnership planning. We find that too many sales teams, customer success teams, even project implementation teams spend far too much of their time here at the project level. In fact, as we look at our client scorecards, as we look at our client dashboards, we find that roughly about 80% of their metrics that they are tracking for client projects live at this project level. Now, those metrics, I don't mean to say that those metrics are bad. I don't mean to say that they are not useful. But what I do mean to say is that they are completely unaligned with the data point that you all put into chat at the start of our session today. And your chat responses actually mirror what Serious Decisions recently studied as well, that 80% of those buying decisions are being made at the corporate level. And so if you come into your implementation, your partnership planning, and you're talking about and wanting to measure metrics that are at the project level, and your senior executives, your C-levels, are coming into that meeting expecting dialogue, discussion, and metrics at the corporate level, they're not going to come back to that next business review because they aren't seeing value. So you've got the project level at the bottom, the corporate level at the top. The middle level is let's call it the connective tissue in between. It's the business unit level, division level, use the term that works best in your business. But as you can see, the triple metric, 3 levels, designed to call out in partnership planning, what are the most relevant project level metrics, business unit level metrics, and corporate level metrics that are going to define success for the relationship. And of course, there's one on here that is most likely the most important to get your executive engaged and to keep them coming back. And that is making certain that you are measuring, identifying, and tracking corporate level metrics. I want to do a quick brainstorm though with the group while we've got it. Again, pop up your chat box. I'm going to drag it over to my other screen so I can see it as well. And in that chat box, the first thing I'd like you to do, and we'll sort of build this together, type into the chat box some metrics that you would put for your business at the project level. The ones that tell you how you're doing on a day-to-day basis, that communicate to your clients that they're doing the right things from an implementation perspective. Drop those into chat. What are some of those project level metrics that you would put out? Product reliability, adoption, Gantt chart stuff. Good response, Andrew, I like that. Go live, adoption, service uptime, absolutely. Location compliance, number of users, number of uploads. Hope you're following along in the chat here. Some great responses, and frankly, some that you could probably grab for your business as well. Go live, service responsiveness, percent of project participants attending reviews, great metric. So as I read through those, and as you do the same, I'm just going to put a couple up on the screen that I had planned already here. But think about that list and look through that list for a second. Those metrics that you just put into chat are predominantly about who? Are they predominantly about your customer, or are they predominantly about your performance as a vendor? So put customer or vendor into the chat as you look at those metrics. Customer or vendor into the chat as to where you see those metrics. Got 50-50 so far. We're leaning vendor. Now we're definitely leaning vendor. A couple customers in there as well. But what we see most often when we run through an exercise like this in a customer workshop is that we find most often is that these project level metrics are predominantly about you and your performance. Again, in and of itself, not a bad thing. But remember what the goal of today's webinar is, getting your executives on the client side to show up to and keep coming back to your business reviews. And so pair that slide with this slide. If most of your business reviews are being focused on report outs from the project level, and most of the metrics at the project level are about you as a vendor and your performance, who's not going to show up the next time there's a reporting meeting? Probably your executive, because they've seen that, in fact, these business reviews are not business reviews at all. They're project check-ins. And again, it is not that they are unimportant, but that is a different environment than the one that you want to establish with your executive. You laid out a compelling quantified ROI case for your executive in the pre-sales process. You're trying to translate that now into a partnership plan at the corporate level. You can't have in that meeting just those project level metrics that are all about you. Let's move up to the business unit level. And I'll populate this one here as just an example. Here at the business unit level, you're looking at those things that are yes, impacted by the project level, but that those client leaders at that middle management to upper middle management care about a lot. For a particular client, it could be net customer adds, customer churn, project satisfaction. Here you're getting away from metrics that are just about you into metrics that are much more about your customer. For this reason, once you start getting to the business unit level, there should be some metrics in there that you as a vendor can't actually measure. Let me say that again. Once you get to the business unit level, there should be some metrics in there that you as a vendor can't actually measure. Why? Because this is about customer defined value and getting your customer executive to engage and stay engaged. And so there are probably some metrics at both the business unit level and the corporate level that your systems and your metrics won't capture. You need to be using customer systems and customer metrics to capture those. And so let's go up to the corporate level. Again, use your chat box for this. Let's try to get a good brainstorm list going. What are some of the corporate level metrics that would fall at the top level of this pyramid for your business? As you look at your clients, what do their C-level executives care about? Type that into chat and we'll get a good list going here. Market share, OpEx reduction, absolutely. Revenue, I love that. Revenue increase, cost decrease, profit increase. You've got your top three right there. Money saved, tax savings, productivity, all of these. These are your classic financial metrics right at the corporate level. Again, I've just got a couple sample answers on the slide for you here as well. And what's interesting is it was amazing to me how fast those answers came into chat when I asked the question, because most sellers, most customer success professionals who are involved in this dialogue know intuitively what these are. Revenue up, cost down, profit up, risk down. Those are your baseline corporate metrics for any business. And yet, as we see sellers and customer success professionals working to get executives to their business reviews, we don't see these numbers on those dashboards. Oftentimes, for the very reason I said before, they are metrics that you alone as a vendor cannot report on. They are metrics that only the client can report on. And do you have the guts in your partnership planning meeting to hold your teams accountable to metrics that you can't see on a day-to-day basis? Because that's what's going to lead to a successful partnership planning effort. Again, this is your first business review post-sale. This is your opportunity to take that quantified yet potential ROI case and turn it into actual client metrics. Because there's one more step to this. You've got a good brainstorm list at each level. That alone is not enough because that won't fill the whole bill. You've got to link those metrics together. And you have to show how the work that your project teams do on a day-to-day basis is going to impact that corporate level metric. And where do you want to start? You want to start this exercise at the very top by picking one or more of the corporate level metrics that your senior client executive cares about the most. That may be a C-level, it may be a VP. but what is the corporate level metric that your products and solutions absolutely have to move for that executive to stay engaged throughout your relationship? Then you determine what business unit level metric is going to tell us if we're on track and can impact that corporate level metric. Well, maybe it's customer churn in this instance. You know that if your products and solutions help that customer reduce their churn, their monthly ARR goes up. And then you got to dial it all the way down to the project level. What are those project level metrics that are going to tell you that you're on the right track? Because here's what happens. If you do this mapping exercise, we call it linking these metrics together. If you do that correctly, these project level metrics actually serve a very important purpose. They aren't just your implementation measures anymore. They serve as leading indicators. Because guess what? In maybe your first business review, maybe your second, maybe you have long implementation timelines. It's unlikely in those first couple of business reviews that you're actually going to have a favorable report out on a corporate level metric. Highly unlikely. However, you know that if you define it right, you could have a favorable report out on project level metrics at that point in implementation. And if you've agreed with that executive in partnership planning that monthly recurring revenue is driven by customer churn, and customer churn results from maintenance costs, then if you report positively on maintenance costs in that first business review, you know then that you're on track in a later review to hit customer churn numbers and a later review in monthly recurring revenue. The opposite also holds true as well. Perhaps in this partnership planning exercise, this first post-sale business review, maybe in this exercise, you actually find that your customer didn't buy enough. What do I mean by that? You find in this that actually your C-level client contact actually also really cares about another corporate level metric, that what they currently bought won't impact. It's just not going to happen. Well, now through partnership planning, you've identified a future expansion opportunity. And so, yes, this partnership planning is fantastic to understand how your client executive is going to measure value right now on what they've bought today. But it also gets you the opportunity in future business reviews to open the door to expansion, because now you know definitively what are the metrics that are on your executive's radar, and what are the metrics then can you drive through other products and services down the road. I'm going to take a quick look over here at the chat panel, because I see a couple questions that are really spot on. And the first is, how do you convince clients to share those corporate level metrics? Well, the first thing, even though we're building this out sort of in tandem in this call, we absolutely suggest going into these partnership planning sessions with a potential draft of what this looks like, so that they have something to react to, especially those customer executives. Not only that, especially for those of you who are selling to public companies, if you haven't already looked at those financial statements, those proxy statements, balance sheets, income statements during the pre-sales process, this is a great way to get a leg up on that in partnership planning. Because again, you need to have the executive see that you are bringing credibility to the table. But coming with a draft is critical to bring something to react to. It may not be 100% accurate. You may not know enough, but that's the purpose of the exercise. A couple other questions. Man, they're coming in fast and furious here, and I love how you guys are answering each other. This is fantastic. Thank you. Another one I saw is like, what happens if you hit the project level metrics, the BU level metrics, but perhaps the corporate level metric doesn't move? Certainly, you and your products and services are probably one of many things that impact those corporate level metrics. And that's also where these tie-ins help you very specifically. Because if there is agreement in partnership planning that maintenance costs impact customer churn, which impacts monthly recurring revenue, then you can say definitively, if indeed maintenance costs went down and as a result, customer churn went down, and yet monthly recurring revenue didn't go up, then you and the customer know that you have to look in other areas to see why that occurred, because the connections that you agreed to actually happened as you expected. You're seeing now why that executive through line is so important in your business reviews. Because if that executive signed off on a contract because you presented them a compelling quantified ROI, and then they come here and in partnership planning, you determine exactly what those metrics are, how they link together, then there's agreement and accountability on both sides of the table. And as you report on those project, those business unit level metrics, you're keeping tabs on how that's impacting the corporate level, and you can get an early read on whether or not there are other factors at play. But certainly, one vendor is not going to sign themselves up for the entire monthly recurring revenue number of your customer. So keep that in mind as you go. I know there are a few more questions. I'm going to plow ahead just in the interest of time and come back to a couple as we go. So far you've seen, to get these executives to come to your business reviews and keep them coming back, you need to make that case, that quantified ROI. You need to translate that in that first post-sales business review into partnership planning. Create that triple metric together with mutual accountability. So now, so far, we've solved for that problem of getting the executive there. We have not yet solved the problem of how do you get that executive to come back. And that's where the third pillar of your senior client unit executives and business reviews comes into play. Because executives don't often come back because you're talking about things at the wrong level and you're not documenting results that are meaningful to them. And so in documenting results, that's your linchpin to getting them to come back, and you're about to see why. So grab that first piece of paper again. This is going to be the final build out of this picture. So they've bought from you. You've planned a great partnership. You are now the status quo. You want to keep that executive coming back. And so, as I just noted, write in document results immediately to the right of the line, because ultimately, business reviews are not for the sake of business reviews. And you'll notice I haven't said one word during the course of our session so far, and that's the word quarterly. Because we want to get rid of the word quarterly, and we want to get rid of quarterly business reviews. We want to see business reviews done when they are needed to be done when they can have impact, and done when they can have a critical commercial moment. Because the goal of business reviews is not simply to get your executive to show up. It's not simply to have a nice dialogue. The goal of your business reviews is, hopefully in the long run, to get that client to buy again and buy more from you. And because you've had that executive presence, the likelihood of that is going up. And so draw a couple other dots on your line to denote those business reviews. And in those first couple dots, draw a couple lines up and to the right. Because ultimately in those business reviews happening like during the vast middle of your contractual relationships, you're looking to lay the groundwork in those business reviews for what we call a why evolve conversation, a customer expansion conversation. Done right with the right executives at the right time, you can leverage your business reviews to create a critical commercial moment where your executives are not only learning about all the great results they've achieved, but learning about where you can take them next. And then in that last dot towards the end, obviously sometimes clients don't buy more. They don't choose to expand, but they choose to renew. And so towards the end of the contract, you want your business reviews to be anchored in a why stay dialogue, a conversation around renewal and retention. And so there's your final picture, folks, and how we'll get into here in just a moment, how document results plays into all of those business reviews. Because documenting results to the right of this dotted line means everything. Every executive business review needs to start with documented results, and very specifically documented results against the triple metric that you determine. And why is that? Why is that so important? Well, one, We found in our research for both why evolve and why stay that the winning message framework started with documented results. Why? Because you, in these business reviews, by documenting results, you are solidifying what we call your incumbent advantage. Your incumbent advantage. And what does that mean? Your incumbent advantage, and why is it your most potent ally in keeping your executives at your business reviews? Assume that this block of blue here in the middle of your screen is the current value that your customers are getting from your products and services today. Maybe for some of your clients, it's a little bit smaller. For other clients, it's a little bit larger. But there's a chunk of value that they are getting from you today. But think about, I'll say this horrible cliche. Think about what keeps your executive buyers up at night. They are thinking about the constant pressure that is on their business. And they are thinking, is the value that I'm getting today enough to meet the demands of the future? And that's what your competition is preying on. That is a risk that your competition is trying to bring to your client executive's attention and saying, hey, I know that vendor's done good work for you, but they aren't going to get you where you need to go because the world is changing and they aren't going to get you where you need to go. That's why you need to keep your executives so engaged, because you don't want your competitors squawking at them in the background about all this other risk that they face. Because you know how much value you've delivered so far. You know the results they've seen. Not only that, you know how much investment they've put in. And that investment could be an investment of time. It could be an investment of dollars. And of course, people resources on your products and services as well. And together, those two things, the value that they've gotten from you, the investment they've sunk into that, is what we call your incumbent advantage. Because that incumbent advantage is so key. That means you have the status quo on your side. And when you document results really well, when you show them the current value of what you've gotten, show them the investment they've made, you can show them how much risk there is to potentially losing that if they were to change or go do something else. And with each and every business review, you are looking to not only establish, but then maintain and solidify your incumbent advantage so that you can get to that expansion sale. Because ultimately, you want that customer to experience an upside with you, and you want to get rid of all those risks for them so that ultimately you and that executive have a long and fruitful partnership based and predicated on the results that you achieve. And so there is, in these business reviews, a tension in the room. There's a tension between what you want to accomplish and what your executive wants to accomplish. You want to accomplish, of course, that you're communicating the value that you've brought. And write this down as well, because it's important. Write down, create a commercial moment. Because a business review executed well with an executive in the room is more than just a project update. It is a commercial moment that you have to harness. And as a result, you want to keep that executive altitude. You got it in the sale, 80 to 100% of deals signed off by that executive. Why are only 40 to 50% of them coming to our business reviews? The tension, though, between those objectives and what your executives are thinking, the executive mindset that they bring to these reviews. Well, in these reviews, they are thinking that they set the goals. They're always looking for the plan from A to B. Where are we going? How are we going to measure progress? And what's the plan if things go off course? And so this tension between your objective of a commercial moment and the executive's mindset of simply wanting to know what's the plan. How do you deliver results in a business review in a manner that does right by that tension and that creates a commercial moment for you? And that's where you're going to go right back to your triple metric, right back to it. And so if you take that linkage that you saw a couple slides before, from the project level to the business unit level to the corporate level, that's how you're going to start every single one of your business reviews. You are going to focus on the metrics that are most important to executives at the corporate level. You're not going to talk about all the superfluous metrics that don't matter to that executive. That does not mean that everything needs to be numbers. In fact, our research found for an expansion sale, quantitative, qualitative, and anecdotal work, they've got to be tied to what that executive cares about. And last, and this is a completely under-leveraged skill in the executive business review, is how do you tell the right story? It's not enough to just slide the dashboard across the table to your senior client executive and say, look how you're doing on all the metrics we agreed to. You need to tell a story. You need to tell a story that puts those results in the best possible light. And that's called a customer story with contrast. The brain loves contrast. The brain of your executives loves contrast. Contrast between what you were doing before and what you were doing today, and how different those things are. And so if you've identified the right metrics that your client cares about the most, and tell them a story about how they've made progress before and after, you increase your chances of keeping that executive on your business review. I'm going to go into character for a moment. Pretend for a moment that I'm a seller or a customer success manager, and I'm about to lead a business review to the senior manufacturing executives at a car company that we've been working with for about a year. My company, as a seller, makes laser measuring equipment. And listen to this story and see if it's a story that could lead off a business review to executives talking about metrics that they care about. Thanks for having us in today for our annual review. And I want to first paint the picture of what your business looked like on your factory floor back before we started working together a year ago. And on your factory floor, prior to using our laser measuring equipment for your car engines, you had an 8% scrap rate, higher than the industry average. Not only that, because your scrap rate was so high, you needed to hold 24 hours worth of parts in inventory on the factory floor. And as you well know, there's only so much space on a factory floor. And we heard from colleagues on the floor that they actually had to move pallets of equipment around in and out of the loading dock area, wasting precious time every day because they were throwing away so many parts. High scrap rate, lots of inventory, which led to perhaps the pain that you as executives might have felt most acutely. Your dealers were actually calling you up because you needed to replace 60 engines a month because they were measured incorrectly. That was before. Then you chose to work with us here at Acme Corporation for our precision laser measuring equipment. And let's see how far you've come across the last year. Well, you've reduced your scrap rate by 50%, 8 to 4. Now you're under the industry average. And as a result of lowering that scrap rate so dramatically, you've been able to reduce that amount you have to hold in inventory. In fact, I was just on the factory floor before coming up to this meeting, talked to your floor manager, and he said there's basically no traffic anymore and workers can move where they need to when they need it. And not only that, again, what probably matters to you the most, because those complaints come to you, rather than 60 engines a month needing to be replaced, there are now 0. And as a result, we're hearing when we survey your dealers that they are far more happy with the product that's coming off the line. Now, that's all well and good. Those are great, but let's look at the financials as well, because certainly as the senior manufacturing executive, you're responsible to your CFO. And so as you look at the scrap rate and the inventory, you've actually been able to save there about $300,000 annually. 60 engines a month down to 0, that was a savings of $1.2 million annually. Now compare that, if you will, to the cost of your investment with us at Acme Company for your precision laser measuring equipment. That's $1.5 million in comparison to only an investment of $275K. We'd love to use that as a jumping off point to discuss how we can further support your workers on the factory floor. Step out of character here for a moment. That before and after story, here's what often happens, even in the best business reviews that we see. We see far too much focus on just the after. And the after is a great story, don't get me wrong, but it's an even better story when it's contrasted with the before. So I want to come back to the visual that you've hopefully had a chance to jot down and write across the course of our time together here today, because I want to show you again just how important it is to have all of these components to get your executives to show up to your business reviews. It starts all the way back in the pre-sales process, building that quantified ROI case with those hard strategic and soft returns to give you what you need to grow into the partnership with the executive engaged when they sign that contract. And then it's another triangle, the triple metric, used during partnership planning to get that executive to commit to those metrics that they are signing up for, that they can move. And then it's documenting results, starting off every business review with a customer story with contrast, where they were at point A, where they are now at point B, and how different those things are because of the solution that you brought to the table, anchored again on the metrics that they care most about. And so how do you get your senior client executives to your business reviews and keep them coming back? You need to make the case, you need to plan the partnership, and you need to document results so that across the entire lifetime of the relationship you have, your executives stay with you, you keep the altitude, and you can measure things that are most important to them. I promised some Q&A. Marissa, I know I've been ignoring the chat panel here, but I'd love to see what questions are popping up and see if I can answer a few before we run out of time.
Yeah, of course. So I know within the Q&A box, Sophie actually asked a few questions. So I know one of her questions was, how would you approach the strategy for business review planning with a large portfolio of customers as a CSM? She said, for example, a more scaled approach. This surely wouldn't be feasible to do with a portfolio of up to 100 customers.
Absolutely. And I just pulled up the Q&A box, so I've got those. So it's a great question, and there's definitely a degree of scale to this. There's definitely a degree of scale, but what I'd say, the things that don't change, every customer, no matter their size, needs to understand the value that they've received because they purchased your stuff. And for some multi-million-dollar accounts, that's a big 3-hour meeting once every quarter, and a quarterly business review is just fine. For some smaller accounts or ones that are just fine, it may be a once every month email with their updated measures. But the key to all of this is indeed making sure that you are measuring the things that are most important to them. And Sophie, I'll take your next question as well on when your executive buyer turns up unannounced. Always a bit of a scary day. But in the research that we've done here, our advice there is to actually structure the business review with the assumption that that exec is going to show up. Because ultimately, if you are prepared to have that executive dialogue and be ready to measure the things that that person cares about, you still only have to prep for one business review. You don't have to prep for different varieties depending on who's in the room. And if you start all the way back at making the case, oops, no, don't go to the next slide. If you start at making the case and then move to the right, the likelihood that that executive starts and then stays with you goes up as well. Let me answer this one because it's a good one too. How's this applicable to existing customers who may or may not have purchased new products? What we recommend coming out of this for that audience specifically, go right to partnership planning. Although in a perfect world, partnership planning occurs immediately after a sale, any business relationship that doesn't have a triple metric in place should have one. Go right back to it. Ask the customer to have that meeting. We only came out with this IP for the first time about 1.5 years ago or so. And so in fact, our sellers at Corporate Visions use that as an opportunity to go back to their clients and define what that partnership plan and that triple metric look like. So it's a technique that can be used regardless of how old or young a client relationship might be. And it's important to do it so that you can then document results on the right things in future business reviews. How do you deal with core admins or champions that are acting as blockers? The perennial question, and this is the last one I'll take before I close this out. The perennial question. Part of that, I'm going to go back to the triple metric again. Part of it is a little bit of persistence. And part of it is signing yourself up and pushing for metrics that you know that your core admin or champion can't impact or doesn't own. Because then it's about making your core admin or champion the hero to that next level up. That's where it's so important to come with that draft. Come with the draft triple metric so that they can react to that and that they understand the importance of laddering up too. Because you're going to have a lot of people in your project status meetings, your project reviews that sit at the project level. And I don't at all mean to undermine their efforts or the metrics that are important to them. And so they need to understand how the efforts that they are working on ladder up to the business unit and then ladder up to the corporate level so that they can see that what you're asking of them is going to help impact the entirety of the relationship. So I appreciate everybody joining here today. I appreciate most folks staying on the entire time. We want to repay that back as well. And so coming out of today's session, Marissa is going to drop a link into your chat. It's the same link that's on the screen to get a free ebook for our customer expansion work. It's called the Expansion Sale, and it covers the 4 critical commercial moments of that expansion sale. Renewals, that why stay conversation. Price increases, why should someone pay more? Upsells, that why evolve, and then hopefully, you never have to use it, but apologies and why forgive. In that expansion sale ebook, you'll take a look at the variety of things that happen in the expansion sale. Thanks you all for joining today. I appreciate it so much. Hope you took something from it and hope you've got a couple diagrams to take back to your teams as well. And I'll leave you with this. How do you get your senior client execs to your business reviews and keep them there? You got to make the case, you got to plan the partnership, and you have to document results. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon or evening, wherever you may be.